Hello and welcome back to the Green Lectionary Podcast, a production of Creation Justice Ministries. The Green Lectionary is a conversation for preachers looking at Scripture through the lens of creation justice. My name is Derek Weston, and today we're looking at Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 to 13, 18 to 26, as we work through the Sundays of Ordinary Time. My guest today is Father Pete Nunnally. Father Pete is the priest in charge of Water and Wilderness Church in Washington, D.C., and the author of the recently released Catching Hope, The Hidden Spiritual Wisdom of Fishing. I am proud to announce that this year the Green Lectionary Podcast will be a part of the God Pods at Theology Beer Camp. Theology Beer Camp is a unique 3-day experience for theology nerds and church outcasts. I had the pleasure of attending last year and got to hear a slate of amazing speakers and have excellent conversations about the current state and future of the church, all while enjoying some excellent beer. Theology Beer Camp will be taking place at Pine Ridge Presbyterian Church in Kansas City, Missouri from October 8th to 10th. Hope to see you there. You can learn more at theologybeer.camp. Join us now as we look at Matthew 9 through the lens of creation justice. I am here with my friend, Father Pete Nunnally. Pete, how are you doing?
I'm doing so good. So good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being on the podcast. Before we get into our text for this week, I want to talk about this book, this wonderful little book that is in my hands.
What is it?
It's called Catching Hope, The Hidden Spiritual Wisdom of Fishing. And it's written by you.
You know, just the title makes me think that's such a well-written book. Insightful. Wise.
Well, it actually is. It actually is a well-written book that is insightful and wise. Tell us a little bit about like what was the motivation of writing this book? Yeah, where did this idea even come from?
You know, I grew up writing, and I've always considered myself a writer. And in some ways been sort of that created a disconnect between whatever I was doing and the thing that I thought I was, which is a writer and a priest. But I grew up fishing and I would write stories. I wrote the high school sports column for the local paper when I was in high school. A lot of people don't know this. My mom has all of the articles. And in the summer, I would write these stories. I was constantly fishing. I grew up near the Potomac River, and I would write these stories. And I remember they told me once, they were like, so there's no high school sports in the summer, so you don't need to write anything. And I was like, cool. Just kept turning the stories in every week. $15 I got paid.
Nice.
But for a long time, I didn't fish as an adult. And then during COVID, I got back into it, and I was ordained at that point and just older. And I saw this whole thing as an exercise in hope. But I saw it through the lens of Christianity and God's presence with us and the elements of Advent, this waiting and this anticipation and preparation for something to happen, for Jesus, for the incarnation. And I realized too that just every cast is a small act of hope. And there are times in our lives, a lot of times in my life, where I didn't have any hope. I struggle with depression sometimes and anxiety. And I realized that at the end of the day, if I go fishing for a couple of hours, I don't catch anything, that's fine. But I can at least say, you know what, for 2 hours, you cast a line out into the water and you hoped on some level that something would happen. Because you wouldn't do it if you didn't think if you didn't hope you were gonna catch something.
Yeah.
So and then I started connecting this, the spiritual practice of fishing with spirituality of the church. And I was like, golly days, this whole thing. And I never really go too far into the like, Jesus picked fishermen and you're a fisher. God, the first thing anybody ever says to me is, you're a fisher of men. And I'm like, actually, I'm a fisher of fish. Like, I want to catch fish. But there's just so much there. And it is true that Jesus picked fishermen. And we'll talk about picking a tax collector later, but there is something very visceral and tangible about fishing. You can't do it from your couch. It's not a mental exercise, although it requires thinking and a paradigm and a perspective that's important, and I think can bring life to the entire church. I hope we get to talk about that. But and I wanted to share that as one way to see how God shows up and how we can make the mundane sacred in our world, because it's my avocation. It's very connected to my vocation.
Mm.
And and in all, God gives us these hobbies and pursuits and passions so that we can discover God and ourselves through them. And this is my way to do that, through fishing.
Yeah. I mean, how much of this, I love all of that. How much of this is like just the being on the water and like being like in tune with an element of creation? Like how much of that is the pushing back against the depression and anxiety? How much of that is the hopeful piece of like being connected with something that feels like so ancient, like so like just a part of what it has meant to be human since the beginning?
Totally. I mean, humans grew up like near water, right?
Mm,
Water is life. We can't do anything, and then it contains life within it.
mm,
So for human history, we've resided near water because it provides food
mm,
and it provides nourishment that we need, especially if it's fresh water. And like my dad and I fished a lot growing up. We still do. We're talking about fishing for bluefish this morning, but we're very different. So he is about catching the fish.
mm.
We're out there, we got lines in the water 5 minutes. And he's like, come on, fish. Where's the damn fish? And I'm like, dude, we're out here on the edge of the water, and you're hearing the surf, and the sun's just come up, and it's just gorgeous, and the birds are cruising around. And dad's like, come on, man, where's the fish? And I'm just like, we're living in heaven right now.
Mm,
And so for me, it's always been that way. Percentage wise, I think, 70%, 60%, just like the experience of it on the
mm,
water's edge, which is like being on the edge of God's fingertips.
mm,
That a wind from God blew over the face of the deep is how Genesis begins.
mm,
This sound of moving water, it reminds us of this, of being in the womb. It reminds us of the moving water within us. It's just, and then to locate ourselves within the ecology of God,
mm,
not just like in a place where we're trying to catch fish, but like these are our brothers and sisters that we're standing next to and around, and they, at the same time, the simultaneous integration into this ecology, and also the diminishment of our own self relative to God's magnificent creation is stunning,
mm,
and itself just, and our limbic systems respond to all that, and our
mm,
anxiety goes down, our amygdala chills out. And then there's the actual practice of what you're doing, which is reading the situation. You're thinking, you're preparing, you're thinking about what species do I want and how to match the hatch, as they say in fly fishing. Or, if I want shad, I got to use lures that go for shad. If I
mm,
want catfish, I got to adjust my rig. And then checking your bait. And like if you're surf fishing, which I like to do, it requires a lot of sitting around, but actually not sitting around. So you get 3 or 4 poles out, but you're kinda always tending to them
mm,
in a certain way. If you're catfishing or doing any kind of fishing with, like, live bait where you're not reeling in all the time, you're still attending to the different things.
mm,
And so I can lose hours by just being solely focused on, you're looking at the rod tip, "All right, everything looks good. You know what? Line's been out for 15 minutes. Let's check our bait," because you don't wanna be sitting out there with an empty hook for an hour. And then so you're just always attending to something,
mm,
and really focused on the present moment. And that, I think, is at least 20% of it, or 30. And then honestly, like 10 to 15% is like catching the fish is part of it. But you have to catch fish. Otherwise, it's too much boring. Like, you know, like you can, Paul's like, you can't hope in vain. You can hope in vain. Like after a while, so if you're going fishing for the first time, give me a call. I will come and talk to your church and take your people fishing. Like, that's part of what I want to do. PeteNunnally.com. You can do that. But and especially if you're taking kids fishing for the first time, you want to go to a pond, use some night crawlers and bobbers, and try to you do want to catch fish
Mm.
eventually, and that's just an incredible thing. But it took me 2 years to catch my first really big catfish when I got back into it several years ago. But
Yeah.
yeah, the large percentage of it is it's a spiritual experience to put yourself in contest with nature,
Mm.
with the natural world, to see ourselves as members of it, not rulers over it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we haven't actually talked about this, but like, I've never been fishing, and like, I have like
I'm out.
since
See ya.
since. No, I was about to say something nice, Pete, but since I read your book, like I've had it locked in my mind that like the first time I go fishing, I want to go with you. And like I was like you made me, because I feel like a lot of what you experience with fishing, I experience as a gardener.
Mm.
And like I want to have the experience I want to have that same experience fishing. So and I want to have it with you. So we're gonna make that happen sometime.
Yeah.
Very serious about that. And like I'm now putting it on a podcast. Like that's how serious, like
Wow.
like that is the level of accountability that I am putting out there.
That was great.
Before we jump into the text, I also want to talk a little bit about I want to segue just a little bit and talk about Water and Wilderness Church, because I have had the privilege of kind of being along with you for the conversation of getting Water and Wilderness Church off the ground,
Mm.
and it's just been awesome to see people responding to what's happening with Water and Wilderness Church. Tell our listeners a little bit about what's happening with Water and Wilderness Church these days.
Number one, Water and Wilderness Church is a watershed community. So even if you don't live near DC, you can be a part. I already consider you a member of our watershed community, because we have online book studies, typically happen Wednesdays at 7 on Zoom. We do webinars. And we do in-person retreats, which just last weekend we did one. We had people come down from Pittsburgh. These two ladies were like Laverne and Shirley. They were the most amazing. Diana and Janie, if you're listening, I love you. I can't wait to hang out again. They were the best. You know, we've had people come from Ohio. Somebody flew up from Tulsa to
Mm.
join us. And so what we offer at Water and Wilderness Church, while we meet Sunday afternoons here in DC on the banks of the Potomac River at 5 p.m., everything we do is for the entire world, and not just the human world. We really do. I mean, I don't submit our parochial report numbers, because how many trees are out there that are part of our congregation? You know what I'm saying? Sorry, National Cathedral. We've got to be. Uh, and they're great. They came. Like I have to say, the Diocese of Washington has been an incredible
Mhm.
place to be. Just excellent leadership, really a lot of collegiality and support. But I wanted to do a church. I wanted to translate our Episcopal tradition into an experience of worship that that just simply translated our tradition into an experience of worship that's meaningful for people that wouldn't come into a church building, or for people that do go to church and are like, this is a little bit boring,
Mm.
and there's got to be more here. Because as a priest, I sometimes feel that way, and I love our liturgy. It is generative, and I think it's time for us to respond to the world around us in a different way, and respond to the climate crisis, the crisis of isolation and anxiety. And one of the best ways to do that is to worship. You know, I hear a lot of people say nature is my church. I would say not quite. Walking in nature is a spiritual practice.
Mm.
But for the people that love nature but won't come to church, we're going to meet you where you already are, which
Mm.
is in the wild. And we're going to bring the elements of our tradition together. And we're building community together out in the wild places. You know, my sister said they get more out of walking in the woods than they do going to church. And when I tell that to people, they nod their heads. Priests are like,
Mm.
yeah,
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense. I'm
Mhm.
like, well, if you agree, then why are we doing the same thing over and over again? Now, I want to be very clear. This is part of a mixed ecology. Dwight Shiley talks about this a lot. The church needs to become a mixed ecology, not just
Mm.
one option of how to do church. I love high liturgy and all that stuff. I'm not like an Anglo-Catholic guy, but like we need that. Like we need cathedral style worship. We need all different types. This is a growing edge for the church to take our liturgy and maybe go off book a little
Mm,
bit
mm.
and let the book of nature be a part of our liturgy and not just the Old and New Testament.
That's really good. That's really good. So we plugged the book.
Can I tell you one more story?
Yeah, please.
So inside church, you typically know what's going to happen. And then in fact, if it doesn't happen, people get mad.
Mhm.
Like you did it wrong,
Yeah.
you know. And I have a mentor said once, like the liturgy doesn't really start till something goes wrong. But when you're in nature, I know, but when you're in the wild places too, you just never know what's going to happen. So it's an
Mm,
incredibly vulnerable experience.
mm,
So we're rain or shines. First question: what do you do when it rains? We worship.
mm.
We just have given up the idea that we're always going to be comfortable. And there's no bad weather, just bad clothing. But you just never know what's going to happen. And Derek, you were there when it sleeted.
It was,
It was
yes.
cold. That was cold.
That was-
And so this past Sunday or 2 Sundays ago, there's a father and son, 2 sons, and they're fishing on right where we're doing communion.
Mm,
But before we do communion, we have contemplative time. So people go out and they read the book of nature by themselves and then they come back. During that time, I go over to the father and son. I'm like, hey, I'm Father Pete. We're going to do like some churchy stuff right here. Is that okay? They're like, yeah, totally. So I'm talking to them. And the cool thing is we live stream this. So this conversation is actually on the live stream. It turns out they're new. They're from out of town. They just moved here. They've never fished here before. And they're trying to get into fishing in general. I mean,
mm.
it's just
Awesome.
the sweetest thing in the world. All right, so we go back to the service, and in the middle of the communion prayer, I look over, and the kid's catching a fish, and I say, hey, look at that, and the kid reels in this like 4 or 5 pound blue catfish,
Mm,
and I ran over and gave him a high five because we had established this relationship. I was like, I'm a fisherman, blah blah blah, and then we all clapped
that's so
for them, and it's not. This is important. We were not interrupted.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were not interrupted. That was part of our communion, and that was communion,
Yeah.
like in a profound sense. And so I think that's what attracts a lot of people to this as well, is that when fish show up or deer or beaver or migratory birds or strangers passing by, this this expands our understanding of when worship begins and ends,
Mm,
and what and thus like kind of where our relationship with God begins and ends.
mm.
And it's just much larger than that.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. And to think for that kid, like one of his first experiences, maybe his first experience of catching a fish, he had a congregation applaud for him. Like
Yeah.
that's that's amazing. Like what a rich experience that is. That's very cool. That's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
All right, awkward segue to our reading for this week. So we're going to talk about Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 to 13, and then for some reason the lectionary skips all the way to verse 18 to 26. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collection station, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Jump to verse 18. While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she was saying to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned and seeing her, he said, Take heart, daughter. Faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that moment. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, the girl is not dead but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread through all the district. So, Pete, where is creation in this passage?
There is none. Moving on. Pass. Just kidding. I'm just kidding, folks. I don't know why I'm so punchy this morning. I do know why. I'm just so happy to be in the presence of Derek. I think it's hard for us to put ourselves in the place of where this is happening.
Mm.
But it's also really important. And for anybody that's gone to the Holy Land area, the topography is really significantly different than ours. There's steep wadis, cliffs and valleys, and I imagine the grit of, not that every place is desert, that's not how it is, but you just are outside so much.
Mm.
And so they're walking from, taking the second part of this story, and the high priest, the priest leader is saying, "Hey, my daughter is dying. Can you come help?" And then on the way, a woman who has been bleeding for a long time interrupts, right? But there's not an interruption.
Mm.
In the same way that stuff that happens at our service isn't an interruption, it's just
Mhm.
what God brings next.
Mhm.
And I think that Jesus easily could have walked past this person. But the first part of that story, where he's with tax collectors and sinners, he's just sort of the outcasty type people, and he's getting crap from the Pharisees. And he's saying, "I don't need your money and your sacrifice. I need mercy." And mercy draws us to one another in a tangible way.
Mm.
And then so now he's walking to help save this girl's life. And rather than ignore something that would have been incredibly embarrassing, illegal to touch, and you have this outcast woman, Jesus centers her by stopping. So he chooses her over this priest leader and his family for a moment,
Mhm.
and thus puts her in the center of the whole gathering that's walking with him. So there's not, I don't necessarily see like an impulse to fight against climate change in this story, but what I do see is the closeness of God
Mm.
and God's preference, not for what in those days the church said you should do, which is interesting because I'm hearing that I shouldn't say that, but but Jesus is preferencing the vulnerable
Mm.
and then healing them.
Mhm.
And just your faith alone is enough. And then he goes along to the home, and he shoos away the flute players and the people, and then lifts this girl up and says she was simply sleeping. And I think one, what we forget is how vulnerable this creation is. I mean,
Mm.
that's part of why we're here. It's this weird balance of, the most vulnerable thing in our world is our natural world. And then also the most powerful thing in our world
Mm.
is our natural world. So we kind of have those two things facing each other with the woman and with Jesus. And Jesus really is the embodiment of all of that. For instance, if you go outside right now and take an axe, you can cut down a tree. It will not stop you from doing that. If you want to put a bunch of rocks in a stream and dam it up, it will not prevent you from doing that. However, another tree is going to grow.
Mm.
Like, there's something about sunlight, soil, and water that is not stoppable.
Mm.
It will grow. And of course, you need the right conditions. You can pollute it, but with enough time, this earth will correct itself.
Mm.
It might not be livable for us, but there's something divine in the soil of this earth. And a river like the Hoover Dam will fall eventually, and nature will do what it wants
Mm.
eventually. But do you see what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, it's short-term vulnerability and long-term power. And I think you see that in Jesus. We can put Jesus to death, or we can kill Jesus, but we can't put him to death. No, wait, reverse that. This is brilliant. This is brilliant. Write it down, everybody. We can put Jesus to death, but we can't kill God.
Hmm.
And I think there might be echoes of that surrounding this story.
Mhm. Mm. I love this because this is one of those texts where there's not a lot of non-human creation in this text, but there's a lot of human creation in this text. And there's
We
a
are
lot
part
of
of it too.
and we are a part of creation. I think it's one of the things that, like, as I'm reading this, I'm going, okay, why did we jump from verse 13 to 18? Verse 13 has Jesus saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And then verse 18 gives you this immediate example of Jesus showing mercy in the place of sacrifice, and centering this vulnerable girl who is in some ways the vulnerability of this leader, right? Like, this leader who probably doesn't have a lot of vulnerabilities, but his daughter is died, and, like, now is vulnerable. And then this woman who is vulnerable, who for 12 years has been suffering from, and let's just name this, like, this is likely menstrual bleeding, right? That,
Right.
like, this is not a sanitized thing here. This is, like you said, the most ostracized, outcast, untouchable, unclean of the community. And I think about what it means for Jesus to touch the unclean, and what it means for us to touch the unclean when it comes to thinking about creation. Like, so often, and I'm rambling now, but stick with me for a second. And so often when we have these creation conversations, we think about the pristine places, right? We think about the beautiful rivers that you get to fish on. We think about the forests. We think about gardens. We think about mountains. We think about the pristine places. But creation is also is also the unclean places, and often the places that we've made unclean, and thinking about how often we make a place unclean and then decide we're not going to touch it. That, like,
Mm.
we do not talk about our landfills. We do not talk about
Thinking
our
of
waste
Superfund
treatment
sites, yeah.
facilities. No, we don't think about our Superfund sites. We don't think about the cancer alleys of the world. We don't think about, like, CAFOs, like the feeding operations that are putting food on our tables, but that are actual horror shows when it comes to the treatment of animals. We have these unclean places in our life, that in our world, that we're not willing to touch and heal. And, like, Jesus is centering those unclean places. Jesus is detouring, like, not just centering, like detouring. Like, when this powerful man asks him to come see his daughter, he is detouring for this unclean woman. And,
Yeah.
like, man, what might that mean for us?
Man, that's brilliant, Derek. And you had me thinking about, like, we don't touch the unclean very often. Like, we don't like to do it, but Jesus does. And I think one of the things that small and large ways, like, if you've been touched by Jesus, then you can touch the other people.
Mm,
Meaning, like, if you've been in the mud, like, if you've been in the gross place of life and needed and gotten someone to sit with you for a while, then it's easier to go back to that place with a healing power yourself,
Mm.
or to allow Jesus to work through you in a different place. So for those who, if you've ever spent a night crying yourself to sleep because you're lonely and you're scared and you're depressed and you're heartbroken, then and then you have felt, God, please make this a little bit easier,
Mm.
like just a little, and that's happened for you, then you're more comfortable going into that place for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true of of the bad places in our world too. Like, if I think spending time in places that aren't perfectly pristine
Mm.
allows us to have an appreciation for the God that's there, just like the God is in the most amazing places. I mean, 300 million gallons of raw sewage poured into the Potomac River. It's
Mm.
the nation's most endangered river right now, and that's where we worship.
Mm.
And we also, like, as much as I love fishermen, they sometimes will leave their crap everywhere. And Fletcher's Cove is where we meet, and there's always trash there.
Mm.
And so it's a pretty place, but sometimes we bring trash bags and clean it up because we care about it. But I think that I would love to see a movement towards, like, re-sanctifying, or just
Mm.
recognizing the sanctity of regular places, or
Mm.
places that are, like, not so good, and plant sunflower seeds, which pull all the toxins out of the ground, stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I for some reason the Wendell Berry quote has been like very much on my radar, that there aren't holy places and unholy places, there aren't sacred places and unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. That,
Mm,
like, we need to be able to see the places that we call dirty, that we call polluted, that we call unclean for whatever reason, not as not as ruined, but as desecrated,
mm,
which then puts responsibility on us, right? Like, because
mm,
we did the desecrating, like, we did the desecrating, and so there's onus that is now ours for the trash that might go into the river, for the garbage. It still boggles my mind that people can still very casually put garbage into campsites and forests and rivers. Like, that's the first thing like the first environmental thing we learn. It's like, don't throw your trash in places.
yeah.
And but thinking about how we take responsibility, and that then means, like, taking responsibility for the quote unquote unclean people, right? Because
Mhm.
this woman is only unclean because a human law said she was, right?
Right. She
Like,
wasn't really unclean.
she wasn't
Well, she was suffering,
she was
but not
suffering.
unclean.
She
Yeah.
was suffering for sure. But, like, she was unclean because the law said she was unclean. And, like, that's onus on us, on the religious community of her time. And, like, we do that still, like, and so that actually takes us back to, so I'm now seeing what the lectionary writers were cooking here, because this actually takes us back to the beginning of Jesus associating, eating with these quote unquote unclean people. He starts
Yeah.
this whole pericope starts with, by the way, I haven't used the word pericope in a long time. This whole pericope starts with Jesus hanging out with the unclean,
Yeah.
that society has told him, the religious folks have told him, these people are not who we're supposed to associate with. And how much of our interaction with creation is the things we're not valuing, the things that we're saying aren't worthy of our time, it's not the good Christian thing to do to be in those places, right?
Yeah. Can I tell a story that makes me look good?
Please.
There's a pond at the camp where I grew up. My sister is now the director of St. George's Camp at Shinemont in Virginia. There's a pond there that we all called the Dead Sea growing up because the stream that fed it had dried up a long time ago, and it was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it smelled bad. Like, it just you sort of had this anaerobic stuff going on, but I actually loved going over there because it was set apart and it was surrounded by hills and, like, foothills. It was very, very small. You could throw a Frisbee across it.
Mm,
But I used to sit there and imagine what it used to be like
mm,
because you could see a dock that was just totally dry at this point. There's no water around it, and dream of what it could be again.
mm.
And I always thought there must have been the biggest fish in the entire world down there that nobody had caught that was just living for 30 years, which I don't think actually happened. But I think I wonder about dreaming in spaces that aren't pretty,
Mm,
like casting our memory back to what it was like before,
mhm.
and then dreaming a new future for it and what that would do if we did that collectively.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I mean, because there is again, I wanna come let's come back to this woman, right? There's this imagination that Jesus has, right? Like I think of Jesus as like seeing this woman and going, I can imagine her healed.
Mhm,
I can imagine her well. I can imagine her 13 years ago before this thing happened. And I can imagine her tomorrow when this thing is gone. Like imagination is such an important part of this. To imagine like this man had to have known, like you don't just assume someone's dead, right? Like he had to have known his daughter was dead. And Jesus imagined her as sleeping, right? And like think of all of these again, if we think about the like desecrated places in our world, the places that feel like they're they're too polluted, they're too far gone, they're too desecrated. Like
mhm,
what if we can like start imagining. I remember where I was when I learned what you were saying about sunflowers.
mhm.
There was a gentleman in Baltimore who reached out to me because he knew that I was a gardener, and he showed me this lot, and he asked me, "Do you know about sunflowers?" And I was like, "Well, I know they exist." Like, please say more. He's like, "Well, sunflowers are able to take the toxins out of the soil, and there have been other lots in Baltimore where there has been heavy metals found in the soil, and they've planted sunflowers, and it's pulled those toxins out of the soil." And this man was standing in this lot, and you could see in his eyes, he wasn't seeing a lot, an abandoned lot. He wasn't seeing the desecrated space. He was seeing a field full of sunflowers. Like that's what he was seeing when he was looking at the space. And like, what if like when we look at the desecrated places in our world, and when we look at the forgotten people in our world, start to imagine them differently. Like start to imagine the restored, the healed, the the revitalized, because that's what Jesus is doing with the tax collectors. That's what Jesus is doing with the other sinner folks he's hanging out with. That's what Jesus is imagining with this girl. That's what Jesus is doing with this woman. He is imagining them. He
Yeah, dude, just brilliant. You have me thinking that resurrection cannot happen without imagination.
mm, mm,
Like, it's like if you can't, and resurrection is real, but it also cannot happen without God's imagination and the the material resurrection of things here.
Yeah.
Yeah, God, that's so good. I first learned about it, and, like, the hope in the eyes of this man as he's dreaming about a field of sunflowers. Like, "Whoa, the world is so hard to live in," and that just gives me chills. I
Mm.
learned about sunflowers after Katrina, so I did
Mm.
post-Katrina recovery work for a long time. 85% of the city was covered in water, and everything was in that water, so all the soil was toxic.
Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
was a friend of mine, an acquaintance had a organization, a nonprofit where they would go around and plant sunflowers everywhere.
Mm. That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. All right. So, with all this stuff that we've talked about, like, where is there a call to action for the church? Like, how can we begin to put flesh, hands and feet to some of the things that we've talked about here?
I think the church needs to look outside of itself, outside of its rhythms, and become a church for the world and not a church for the people inside of it.
Mm.
Somebody said, it's the only institution that exists for the benefit of its non-members,
Mhm.
and we need to renegotiate.
I actually used to know who that quote was from, and I can't remember right now.
It's Art or somebody. It's not me, but I think we need to renegotiate what our congregation looks like, because if your
Mm.
congregation doesn't look like the living things around you
Mm.
besides the humans, I think we're not living into the fullness of what the body of Christ is, which is incorporate the living things, not just humans. So that would be one thing I would say is, and that means that the vulnerable are all around you.
Mm.
And the vulnerable are not just, well, I mean, I think the church needs to focus more on vulnerable humans in the world, but also to broaden our perspective and say, like, wow, are we creating harm
Mm.
to the vulnerable creation around us? And then if so, how can we imagine and dream a better future and a resurrection of the areas around our church that have been desecrated?
Yeah. 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 And I think that that idea that, like, if your church doesn't include the sinners, if it doesn't include the tax collectors, if it doesn't include the bleeding women, if it doesn't include the dead girl, like,
Mhm.
if it doesn't include all of those things, like, and all that they represent, like, are you the church of Jesus? Because the church of Jesus has all of that in it, right? And, like, it has those that we have written off, human and non-human. It has those that are wounded, human and non-human. It has those that we have counted for dead, human and non-human. And, like, that's the church. That to me is a church that I could get excited about. Like, that for me is a church that, like, feels like it's worthy of who Jesus was. And I feel like that's the kind of church that you are creating. And I feel like that's the kind of church that you like. I feel like you have that imagination of a church that looks like that. And I feel like I've heard you express that imagination before. And I'm really grateful that there are people like you out there in the world who have that kind of imagination for what the church can look like.
Well, you blessed me a lot, brother. Thank you for saying that. And I love your call for the church. And yeah, noticing who's not there is really important. I just try to be honest with people about myself, my own struggles. And, as you said in your blurb for my book, Catching Hope, The Hidden Spiritual Wisdom of Fishing, feel free to buy 10 copies, each available everywhere. But the book is about struggle. And I think part of what is hard for churches and church leaders in this area is they don't know their own struggle sometimes, and they're not honest, and they're not honest with their people, and so you end up creating a culture where everybody's pretending like everything is okay.
Mm.
But also just if everybody in your church looks like you gotta find it different, like, but no, none of them are perfect,
No.
and like, like game recognizes game. People like to be around people that they feel like you're like me,
Mm.
and that doesn't need to be race, gender, age, but but I'll stop talking. What you said was beautiful. You should cut everything out. Everything I just said, you should just cut out.
We'll think about that. Well, one last thing that I do want. One last thing that I do want to have you talk about, because I want people to be able to find you, and one of the things that I've also just really appreciated is that like you have taken your platforms very seriously and have used them really well. So tell people where they can find you.
Thanks. Online, I go by Father Pete the Wilderness Priest. I have a Substack at that name. I would love for you to subscribe to the Substack. I write about once a week on stuff. I have something coming out today on Rogation Sunday and how,
Hmm.
which is draws the church out into the created world and how that can be the fulcrum for a new imagination of church. And on Instagram and TikTok, same thing, Father Pete the Wilderness Priest. Sometimes that's FR underscore the underscore wilderness or Pete Nunnally should get you there. And Facebook as well. And then my own website. I can't believe I have a website, dude. It's crazy. But it's all part of the deal. And honestly, like in all these different places, because if you're starting a new church, you have to be really entrepreneurial about everything. And as Derek and I were talking before we started recording, the church does not invest in church plants very well. It does not invest in anything new. And it requires people out of the goodness of their heart to throw their entire lives into the machinery if they want to make something work. So that's what I'm doing. But if you're rich, please give me money. Wateringwilderness.org. No, I like straight up, and I
But
don't want you to cut.
seriously, if you're rich, give Pete money.
And I want to take. There's a whole other podcast we should do about this, but Turning Point USA. So I make these videos about faith and politics because I want people to have a different vision of God than what they get from the right. And for the last 50 years, the progressive church and the moderate church have abdicated the microphone and just let the Christian right tell the entire world what God and Jesus is. And meanwhile, I don't know what we were doing, arguing over doctrine, I guess, or not even. Like we were just protecting our buildings. But Turning Point USA has a budget of about $100 million a year. Charlie Kirk did not come from nowhere. It it's highly organized, and they're doing all of this, of course, to like generate Republican voters. And in this, not just like Christian nationalist
Mhm.
voters, right? Republican voters are great. Christian nationalists voted because neither party has a monopoly on common sense, but but so they are churning out, thousands and thousands of people. They're giving the wrong view of God,
Mm.
and it's toxic and it's killing people. The progressive church doesn't. We've disinvested from all of that. And in my own denomination, the Episcopal Church, for a year and a half, they just closed down the church planting office, and there's very little funding, and it comes out in dribs and drabs. So, you know, the people on the other side are well paid for what they do, and they wonder why they're success. We were like, why are they so successful? They're well paid. Like they have space, they have staff, and church planters, by and large, in progressive spaces, it's a crazy,
Yeah.
but we are forced to do everything on our own with no support. And so I'm asking you, if you are a millionaire or a billionaire, or if you have $5 extra, you can help support Water and Wilderness Church because we are not fully funded. The Diocese of Washington gives us half of our funding, which is amazing. I can't say enough good things about Bishop Mary Ann Buddy and the Diocese of Washington and Council. They've been remarkably supportive. Like, I love it here. And when you're starting a church from scratch, even if you have to raise, which we do, $75,000 a year and more every year, like that's a lot of money to raise from just a handful of people. So if you're rich, give me a call and let's talk.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. And like I appreciate that because I have watched so many just because of the circles that I'm in, I've watched so many friends start progressive churches and either like have to lay off staff, have to close their doors, have to like do some other side hustle because it is there's so little support. And so we have to name that.
And then what happens? What's the word? The B word.
Which B word?
Burnout. Then all of a sudden, you burn out and you can't do it anymore.
That's a different podcast, Pete.
And you're broke.
And you're broke. There's a lot of B words.
You're burnout and broke.
Yeah.
All right. I love y'all.
Thank you, Pete, so much for this. Catching Hope, this hidden spiritual wisdom of fishing. Buy it. Support Pete. Support good things that are happening in the world. And
thank you.
Pete, thank you so much for being one of the good things that is in the world.
Back at you, my brother.
Thank you for joining us for the Green Lectionary Podcast. This episode was produced by Sprocket Wagner, and the song within these pages was written and produced by Christian McIver. You can learn more about this and other programs at Creation Justice Ministries or give at creationjustice.org.
Our story comes alive within these pages, for every time and place throughout the ages. God speaks and is heard, and the enduring word calls us to care for our world as we share the love that can set creation free. Restoring the earth to wholeness, peace, and harmony. Let the songs of the water, land, and sky resound, 'cause together we're all bound. Within these pages, there's always new life to be found.